Hi, my name is Michel Roy and I'm a contributing editor at Canadian Home Workshop magazine, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to cut a mortise and tenon joint by hand. The mortise and tenon joint is one of the oldest woodworking joints. It's one that all woodworkers have to master, and to be able to do it by hand is very important if you're either a beginning woodworker or a very advanced woodworker. As a beginning woodworker, one of the best reasons for learning how to do this by hand is because the investment to get involved in doing joinery is very, very modest. All you need is a mallet, a chisel, and a saw. And as a more advanced woodworker, the reason for doing mortise and tenon joinery by hand is to show off your skills, so that you'll be able to tell people that you've made a joint without using any electricity. So the parts of the mortise and tenon, this is a hand-cut mortise, which you mortise out with a mortising chisel. I'll show you in a moment. And the parts of the tenon, which I'll also show you. The sides of the tenon are called the cheeks, and these parts of the tenon are called the shoulder, and that's the part that butts up against the wood to make the joint. So to begin, in order to make any woodworking joint, of course, you have to mark out where the joint is going to be. There are a number of tools that you can use to mark out a mortise. Some of them are specialized and some of them are very rudimentary. You can use a pencil and a square to do this. I prefer to use a marking knife for striking the ends of the mortise, primarily because it stores the wood fibers and gives you a nice clean edge to set your chisel against. So I'm going to begin by, this stock is about 2 1/4 inches wide, and I'm going to start with a mortise that's about 1 3/4 inches long. I'm just going to pick that sort of out of the air to give me a shoulder on all sides of the tenon. This is a specialty tool. It's a mortising gauge, and you'll see that it has a couple of pins on one side, and you set these pins to the width of the mortising chisel that you're going to use. And this is a 5/16 chisel, so I've already set the pins to the width of the chisel. You also align the fence on the mortising gauge so that it positions the mortise where you want it on the stock, either in the center of the stock or on one side. So use the mortising gauge. You simply slide it down the stock, scoring a pair of lines which establishes the side of the mortise. I'm just going to clamp this stock down so you'll be able to see. The thing about a mortising chisel is different from a regular chisel. It has a very deep section, which you can see here. It's very strong because primarily you have to hammer it quite hard, and it has a rather steep angle on the tip. To begin the mortise, you want to line up the tip of the chisel just before the end of the mortise that you scored, and begin with small taps all the way down those two lines, in between those two lines. Turn the chisel at the end so that the bevel is facing towards the middle. And then you want to clear these chips out. At this stage, it's important to be very careful that you don't chip out the sides of the mortise, and you can go more heavily as you get deeper. You'll notice I'm facing the bevel toward the center of the mortise, and I'm actually holding the chisel very close for control. If you find that your fingertips are getting cut because of the sharp sides of the chisel, you can very gently rub these down with some emery paper, or cover the chisel with masking tape to protect your fingers. By facing the bevel towards the middle of the mortise, you create a fulcrum against which you can pry out the waste at the end. It's generally a bad idea to pry from the ends because you'll damage the outside edge of the mortise. There, with the last trimming cuts for the mortise made, I'm going to turn the mortise upside down. I'm going to tap the end grain of the stock with the chisel in order to get the extra chips out, which is a lot better than banging the stock on the bench, which will dent your stock and leave unsightly marks. So now let's move on to doing the tenon. In order to cut the tenon to fit the mortise, which is the normal order of operations, the first thing you want to establish is the tenon's shoulders, and you want to do that by finding out the depth of the mortise that you've cut. This mortise is 7/8 of an inch deep, so I'll set this marking gauge to 7/8 of an inch, and I'm going to then score all around the tenon stock at that 7/8. So there's the shoulders of the tenon established, and next I want to establish the cheeks of the tenon, and I can use the same setting on the mortise gauge that was set before. Pass it over across the top of the tenon stock. And the only thing left to set is the shoulder cut on either side of the tenon. And then you're ready to begin. In order to cut the tenon, you want to use a hand saw. You can use either a Western-style dovetail saw or a Japanese-style dovetail saw. There are purpose-built tenon and carcass saws, which are also good for this task. But the important thing is to have a saw that has a rigid back, which will allow you to cut a fine, close line. So you want to begin by sawing down the outside of the line that you scored with the mortising gauge. And it's great if you can make it fit the first time around, but it's better to go big and trim the tenon back than to make it too small, because then of course your joint won't have worked out very well in the first place. So I'll begin with the back saw, following the line. I'm going to turn my stock around so I can see it a little bit easier. I'll begin on this corner. Go down to the shoulder mark, and then join the two lines. You want to be careful not to go too deeply, because then you'll get an unsightly overcut. Next, you want to go to another shop-built tool, the bench hook. The bench hook is a very simple tool. You can make one with a flat board and a couple of ledger strips, and its whole purpose is to hold the board flat against the bench so that you can use your back saw. Saw down to your marks. So the extra stock lifts away. In order to trim the tenon, you can turn to a number of different tools. You can use a rasp or a wood file. You could use a block plane, especially on a larger tenon. And you can also use a shoulder plane, which is the proper tool for trimming tenon. And a shoulder plane can be used for trimming both the cheeks of the tenon as well as the shoulder of the tenon. And in this case, the scored line, I cut just before the scored line, so I'm going to use the shoulder plane to plane back to that. And the bench hook is very handy here, preventing breaking out on the back end of the stock. You can back your shoulder right up against this part of the bench hook and quite simply start planing away to your layout line to get a nice square shoulder. So after you trim away at the tenon to make it fit the mortise using test fits as you go, should be able to slip the tenon into the mortise with hand pressure. It should be relatively snug, and you're done. So I'm Michel Roy. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out CanadianHomeWorkshop.com for other techniques like this one.